Greetings, all. I'm Dr. Yokiam Debale. Welcome to the African Village Woman podcast. It's a pleasure to be here in Dogo for you being here. For today's episode, I am going to dedicate it to my deceased elder sister. She captured in many ways the topic that we're going to address for today. Her name was Shidu. She was also known as AKA Kaka or Faith. But my sister passed away when she was much, much young in her 30s, and she was a quintessential example of the topic I'm going to highlight today as it relates to navigating rural and city life. And I learned a lot from her life, and I'm dedicating it to her. And I'm sorry that she's not here because I do miss my sister. All right, so today's topic, for those of you, pardon me, for those of you who do not know what this podcast is about, this podcast centers African rural women. I center African village women, okay? And in all of that, the way I center them is by telling stories, discussing research, and also highlighting our lifestyles. I said ours because I grew up in a village in northern Nigeria. So highlighting our lifestyle through an Afrocentric perspective. And at times I'm going to also bring examples of experiences of rural people of African descent in the diaspora and other parts of Africa as well. Okay. So again, thank you and welcome. So today's episode, the topic is, let me read it to you. Do rural women and city women want the same things? Do rural women and city women want the same things? And I'm saying yes and no. Okay. Yes, rural women want the same thing as city women. Yes, we both groups want the same thing in life, and that is good life. But where rural women and city women part ways is how to get that done. So for city women, their way of their approach to getting the good life, right, is by subscribing to Eurocentric ways of doing things. Obviously, I'm not generalizing. I'm saying most, okay? Most city women, they subscribe to Eurocentric way of doing things. And the reason being is so individualistic. So city women are often quite individualistic. And part of it comes with a package of being in the city because African cities have been structured in a very Eurocentric way, most African cities, especially the ones that have been colonized by Europeans. For example, Nigeria. Okay, so the city women look things through an Afrocentric, through a Eurocentric lens. So very individualistic. They are all mostly fighting up for themselves, and it comes with a package of living in the city. You have to fight for yourself. You're not living in a community in your village. So it makes sense in many ways. So they look at things through an individualistic lens. So they will go at all lengths to get what they want. They will fight. So even the interaction with men can be combative because they want to get ahead too. So let's say, for example, a man and a woman are looking for a job as bankers, right? That woman is not going to be thinking about, oh, this man is going to get a job. Maybe he will be of help to me. No, what she's going to be thinking of, I'm going to fight for that job and get an opportunity for myself. Okay. And the other part of it is because post-colonial Africa, the way Europeans left the African space, the institutions are not put in place in ways that it can benefit African people. Okay, so African city women had to subscribe in many ways, Eurocentric way of doing things so that they can survive. Okay, where it becomes problematic is when city women think that their way of doing things is how we should do it in the village. I'll come to that later. But for now, I'll highlight actually a good book. It's a good book titled by I do remember the first name is Helen. I'll put it in the chat at any rate. The author highlighted how African cities, especially in Nigeria, how African cities was structured. So she gave a very good example with Nigeria. Traditionally, there was some balance in terms of gender roles and leadership. But when Europeans came to Nigeria, they set things in place where so the hierarchy, in fact, there was hierarchy. So the hierarchy is that white European men, and then you have white European women, and then they brought African men, so African men, and then after African men, then the African women. You see, so the African women, so the way the system is put in place, it puts African women at the bottom. So when you're in the city, you're fighting with men trying to be at the top. So it makes sense to some extent for rural women, I mean for city women, pardon me, to be very Eurocentric because they're trying to survive and they're in the city. So very individualistic. And then, so this colonial legacy, it's how things have been wrong to date in Africa, and especially in my context of Nigeria. And so success means for city women, success is I fought the man and I got a job and I'm doing things on my own, right? I'm every woman, I'll do my own thing, forget the community. Yeah. So when community comes in conversation, they in some ways they're not interested in those conversations because for them it's like I'm fighting for a job, women's right. Yeah. I need to be at the top. So the competition is between men and women. Okay. So while in a rural context, it's a bit different. In rural context, it's a bit different because rural women are fighting different things compared to city women. Although city women believe that rural women should subscribe to their ways of doing things, I disagree with that because I will tell you why. Rural women are not they have other issues. Fighting men is not a priority for them. As a matter of fact, in a rural setting, communal way of doing things, it's how things are get done. Men and women doing things. You also have gender complementarity. And the scholars that I would like to highlight actually are two scholars. Let me get two scholars that I would like to highlight are Ifeoma Jume. She wrote this book, who's a Nigerian scholar. She's of Igbo descent. She's currently in the US, I believe. She's teaching, although you don't see much of her in public, but she's one of the great scholars out there. She wrote a book on gender relations in African context where traditionally in the Igbo context, men and women were not combative. Colonialism played a role in disrupting that order. So now we see Igbo women as oppressed and African women in general too, because she gave in the book, which I'll put in the description at the bottom of this podcast. She shows how men and women were working together. It was not the goal was to get the work done. The goal was not who is going to be at the top and who is going to be at the bottom. Okay. The other example is if in my work, so my dissertation for my PhD that I got done, I researched in my community in northern Nigeria where gender complementarity is part of how things are done. It's called tukubini. Tukubini means unity, and what tukubini does in practice is that it's men and women working together to accomplish a goal. So, for example, if a husband and wife, they have farm work to do and they have children, the husband will go to the farm and do the work while the woman will take care of the children. If the children are a bit older, then the children could stay home. Or in fact, if they're teenagers, they could go to the farm and help mom and dad farm. So and other ways, so your different strengths are pulled together so that you can get the work done. So the competition is not between men and women, but rather on the goal, the fight is to fight how we're gonna conquer this problem. You see. So another scholar her name is Nkiru. She's a scholar also of Nigerian descent. I will also put the description of her work on the bottom. She also that's her first name is Nkiru. I do remember that. The title of her book is Family Matters. That's the subtitle of the book, Family Matters. She also discussed similar ideas that I'm talking about how gender, so the idea of the Eurocentric understanding of gender and how it plays in African society has been distorted partly because of our history of colonialism. But the other part of it is also how it's interpreted. Okay, so mainstream feminists, they interpreted that African societies are oppressive to women, but they're not paying attention to how the gender dynamic. Well, maybe they don't know this, or they have not explored. Okay, that there are different ways in which gender operates in societies globally. So we cannot see things through narrow lens and so limiting. Okay, so rural women are very communal, and they see things through the communal lens. As a result, for them is that gender fighting men is not the problem. What really the issue, the problem for rural communities would be infrastructure or lack thereof. So, for example, the context where I come from, poor infrastructure as it relates, roads are bad. So those are the priorities for rural women. Roads are bad. Hospitals, they only have one doctor for the community. For example, that I've done my research. I did interviews, my ethnographic. No hospital, poor. Okay, no electricity. In fact, in that village. Okay, no community center, etc., etc. So infrastructure, things that are needed for the community to live well and continue to thrive, it's not there because the mostly the governments and people that are put in place are not doing their job, or they're not also bringing the resources that have been given to them so that they can get the work, they can help contribute to this development. Okay, so city women and rural women are not fighting the same battles, although rural women and city women want the same thing, and that is good life. So this generalization about African women, so often when you hear stories or you read research, right? You listen to the news, African women are so oppressed, they, because of patriarchy. Actually, there's no nuance angles to this situation that ought to be looked at in order to solve the problem. So if there's a problem, right? That means if I say my head is hurting, I don't go around and and maybe jog. No, I'll try to find out what really is the issue, what's causing this headache. And then when I figure out what's causing the headache, right, I'll take medicine to take care of it. And that is how I think that we ought to look at issues, women's issue in Africa, as it relates to, oppression or no oppression, marginalization or no marginalization. So I'll conclude there. I hope you got something from this brief discussion. And if you have any question, put it in the chat, comment, pushback, what have you. Thank you again for being here. I encourage you, for those who are new, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. I look forward to exploring more topics. Okay, until then, take care of yourselves. Now go this will say the Zona. I'm saying that thank you so much for being here, and take care of yourself.